comes to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, many plot elements of the series rest on the actions of those who were affected by the most important and iconic thing in the series, that being the Stone Mask, an ancient bit of complex technology that not only led to the Brando and Joestar meeting, but also helped perpetuate their multiple generation-long war. And it also nearly led to the complete and total destruction of the human race, and even though it may have disappeared from the plot, the ripples of its effect will last until the end of the original universe. But how it exactly worked is actually up for discussion, so on Halloween of all nights, I wanted to dig deeper and try to understand how the Stone Mask possibly worked. Not the bad guy. So to get started, it would help to understand the mask's own possible real-life origins and the history of it throughout the series of JoJo. The Stone Mask appears to be an overall original idea by Araki, because as far as I can tell, there is no direct musical influence or cinematic one. But it does seem to have a few historical influences, mostly based on ancient discoveries around the time of Part 1. Along with this, you also have the horror influence in the shape and effect of the mask, as the mask not only has long fangs and consumes blood like a vampire, but it also gives those abilities and effects to its user. Along with this, it also gives them a weakness to the sun, which appears to be how Araki justifies the, at the time, mysterious disappearance of the Aztec people, which their destruction at the hands of the sun is quite ironic, given that their name literally means the people of the sun, and is possibly the reason that Araki chose vampires to be the specific horror influence. Though, how did the mask end up in the hands of humanity? Where did it come from? Well, it was originally created by a genius inventor from a race that long predated humanity, the Pillarmen, with the original purpose of the mask being to allow the Pillarmen to conquer the one thing their race feared, the sun, as the rays of the sun were deadly to Pillarmen the same way they are deadly to human vampires. And how the mask was designed to work was the bone or spines of the mask would pierce the brain through the skull of the creature who wore it and unlock their brain's hidden potential. Which leads me to my first bit of speculation, as we don't know what material was used to create the mask, and it's never disclosed in the series besides the claim that the mask is made of stone. Though, given how Cars refers to parts of the mask as bones or spines, I have a theory that the stone mask itself is created from the skulls or remains of a dead Pillarman, as long before the slaughter of his people, Cars did have bodies to work with. Not a lot, but Pillarmen still died of regular causes. They were mortal, especially given the fact that a lot of them were killed by swords and spears when Cars overthrew them. Along with this, the use of Pillarmen carcasses in Cars' experiments would lead people to be a lot more uneasy around him about it, and why they would be more willing to jump to the let's just straight kill that guy as soon as Cars started showing negative side effects of the mask. And then finally, it would also explain its almost magical reaction to blood, as even before the mask, the Pillarmen did consume life essence from other living things through their blood. So, it could make sense that if you rubbed a little bit of blood on a Pillarman's old bones, it could have a possible instinctive reaction to try to consume it. We even know for a fact that Pillarman bones can produce an intensely powerful light and be manipulated in an interesting way given how Cars' brilliant bone blades work, and the spines of the mask are very similar to that of Santana's own ribcage. Along with this, it would also help explain how the spines of the mask had trouble piercing a Pillarman skull, as they were made from the same material, and thus they could only unlock the hidden potential of the bodies of the Pillarmen, given that Cars and his followers were granted near immortality and special powers, but at the cost of a more destructive hunger. I'm going to refer to this species as a advanced Pillarman, as Cars and his gang aren't ultimate life forms yet, but they also aren't just standard Pillarmen anymore. They are the next step in Pillarmen, bodies at least. Where when the mask is used on any other living thing, it grants them an evolution into a zombie or a vampire. Though these vampires are weaker than a standard Pillarman, so Cars would actively turn humans into vampires to make them stronger servants, along with making them walking yearly meals that he can just consume on the regular as he looks to create a more powerful mask. In fact, turning humans into vampires and then eating them gave him enough nutrients to last him a year, which sort of solved the hunger crisis that the Pillarmen tried to kill him over, so I'm going to put one ball in Cars' court for this one. And soon Cars would learn of the Asia, a stone that can reflect light up to millions of times, turning it into an intensely pure light. So upon discovering this, Cars worked to implement the Asia into his mask design, creating countless prototypes, but they all failed, as a regular impure Asia proved to be too weak, as it couldn't produce enough energy to force the spines through the Pillarman's skull. But soon, the Hamon clan in their possession of a pure Super Asia reached Kars, and he was determined to get his hands on it. Thus, him and his crew left the lab of Mexico and headed to Rome. Though after wandering Rome for a while, the Pillarmen decided to take a couple thousand-year-long rest. And while the Pillarmen rested, the stone mask would end up in the hands of humanity. The mask would then soon begin its cycle of rediscovery, starting first with the Aztec people, as they would find it and use it in rituals to grant their tribal chiefs immense strength, becoming a symbol of the god and helping the Aztec people rise to be the most powerful tribe in the world. But just as quick as their rise to power, so too was their disappearance from history, leaving behind ghost towns for archaeologists to dig through, and soon the mask would be rediscovered again by an expedition led by the Zappelli family. Though on their voyage home from the ruins, William Zappelli's father would be compelled to don the mask, and soon he became a vampire and killed all his crew among the ship and chased his own son overboard into the ocean below. But the morning rays soon vaporized his body, leaving the mask adrift in the ocean until it was again rediscovered and put on display in a British art gallery in London, which in turn caught the eye of Maria Joestar, causing George Joestar to purchase it, and on their trip back from the gallery, the carriage they were riding in suffered a terrible crash, the mask indirectly claiming the first of many Joestar lives in the process. George Joestar would recover from this crash and later mount the mask on his mansion's wall as tribute to his late wife, but soon this mask would end up in the hands of Dio, who would fully uncover its true potential through some field testing and later use it to reject and overcome his own humanity, fully putting into motion the generations-long struggle with the Joestar family, though the mask that did grant Dio his power was destroyed. But not only is it later discovered that the stone mask is only one of many, as the lab of Kars is uncovered alongside the mummified corpse of an Aztec zombie, who is likely actually only there to provide nourishment to Santana while he was sleeping, but soon the advanced Pillarmens would awaken and continue their search for the Super Asia. And not only would they achieve their goal after some hard work and sacrifices, but Kars would combine his life's work with the Super Asia and actually evolve into a being beyond vampires, beyond Pillarmen, and even beyond the sun. He would become the ultimate life form. Now, the existence of the Super Asia mask has had people wondering what would happen if a human or a vampire used it. And honestly, if you ask me, given what we've seen from the series and how we see the masks work, I think the mask wouldn't really do much for humans or vampires. As we know, the original mask had no problem piercing the skulls of humans. That's how they became vampires. And the point of the Super Asia mask was to increase the strength of the mask's own spines. So a supercharged mask wouldn't really help much given the fact that it already pierces into their brain. In fact, it might just overextend and kill the person, given that this was designed for a being with a much thicker skull, so these spikes might just go clean through the person's head. And I don't think it would change much if a vampire used it either, especially since the Asia mask also breaks upon use, meaning that there's a lot more energy just surging through it. Though I honestly think a vampire would benefit more from using one of Kars' prototype Asia masks instead of the Super Asia mask, as the Super Asia mask seems to be designed specifically for Pillarmen, where the regular prototype Asia masks, they may survive the mask, but the best case scenario is the mask just allows a vampire to exist in the light, which in itself is incredibly dangerous, but I seriously doubt that they would become anything close to an ultimate life form, given that they aren't Pillarmen, since Pillarmen are a completely different genetic makeup. Though speaking of genes and geneticism and evolution, I actually want to discuss how I believe the stone mask itself works. Now, in canon, how the effects of the mask exactly trigger is completely unknown. Though, what we do know is that once a user places the mask on their face and offers some blood, the mask will attempt to pierce their brains using a special acupuncture technique, and soon, it will glow with a blinding intense light. And it should be noted that this light only appears when it's attached to a living thing. When it activates on its own without being attached to someone, it does not glow, meaning that the glow is part of the evolutionary effect. And once the light fades, the target has been biologically changed from a human into that of a vampire, or from a Pillarman into that of an advanced Pillarman with their own unique battle modes. Now, with all that understood, using my hypothesis for the existence of the masks, that being that they are made of Pillarman bones or remains, how I believe the stone mask works is it injects cells or biologic material of the Pillarman into its wearer. Hence why, when worn, it glows like a brilliant bone blade, as a complex biological process is in effect which alters the body of the wearer. Now, this altering of human DNA helps us give us understanding onto why humans would suddenly become weak to their own life energy, as it used to be a natural process for them, but now that their biological chemistry is different and more similar to that of the structure of a Pillarman's, but not exactly the same, they are in all sense an abomination of biology. Though this does not permanently alter the human's own DNA. As we see, Dio is able to have normal children. Sure, the children then turned out to be huge fuck-ups for the most part, but that's on them, not on their own biology. Dio does not pass on vampire genetics, though some could make an argument that a little bit of that vampire gets in there, given that Gold Experience does do a re when it's attacking sometimes. Though I think that's more of a cute little nod to Juno being the son of Dio rather than it being any biological evidence that vampiric DNA gets passed down. Now, the Pillarmen, when they use the mask, they aren't injected with a foreign substance at all. Instead, I see it as their natural process being boosted to the peak of Pillarmen potential. Thus, they gain full control over their bodies, but have to deal with an increased hunger, as they are now the equivalent of multiple Pillar Men. And how I feel the Super Asia mask works is that not only does it increase the force of the spines, allowing it to pierce a Pillarman's skull, but the light created by the mask is hyper-purified, helping evolve the Pillarman cells inside the stone mask into something of a higher caliber, thus not only tapping into the hidden potential of a Pillarman's body, but helping them evolve their mind into something perfect. It's even said in the spiel that we're given about Ultimate Cars that every one of Cars' cells is now programmed with a genetic history of evolution entirely, so he can become anything and everything that is alive and will ever be alive. And what makes this possible is that Pillarman biology contains some of the earliest genetic information from any known history, as they were one of the first few creatures to ever emerge from the primordial ooze of creation. They are probably some of the earliest living DNA in existence, so in using the Super Asia mask, you are not only purifying the physical representation of biological evolution, but also injecting it at full force into your brain. With a process like that, it'd be weirder if you didn't get forcibly evolved in some way. In fact, that's almost exactly how the stand arrow itself works. Though, given that Pillarman biology is kind of important to the process, I doubt that the Super Asia mask would work at all for humans or vampires, especially since Cars didn't really care about human biology, and all of his research hinged on his own race's biology. So it's always possible, but it's severely doubtful. The stone mask is quite possibly one of the most iconic things that Araki has ever created, and even though it doesn't matter beyond part 2, its history and impact on the world of JoJo will last until the end of the original universe and has influenced other series like Castlevania. And I had a lot of fun digging through the series and trying to piece together sort of an understanding on how this mask could possibly work, along with a bit of fan theory crafting. I don't think Araki had this all thought through. I think the mask is just supposed to be a supernatural, mystical force that was created by someone in the past, and I think that's about as far as he was planning with it. And that's not a bad thing, I should say. We don't really need to know how the stone mask works for JoJo to work as a series, but it is always fun to try to uncover how it possibly worked using concepts and ideas brought up in the parts itself to possibly piece together a sort of coherent way that this object would work in its own universe. And I hope you enjoyed this video as well. And if you did enjoy it, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/ManyNotTheBadGuy. And if you want to reject your own humanity, well, you can do so first by buying a copy of Shimonetta, a boring world where the concept of dirty jokes doesn't exist, at buyshimonetta.com.